distinguished participants, Assalamu alaikum, Shubo Shonda. My name is Arlisa Reynolds. I'm the Public Affairs Officer at the U.S. Embassy in Dhaka, and I'm joining you here from the EMK Center in Dhaka. We're thrilled to have so many of you join us for this really interesting discussion on reimagining higher education. We've called it in post-COVID world, but COVID is ongoing, so kind of in this new era. Education has always played an important role in society. I was looking for a quote that captured that, and I found something by a former president of the United States, President Abraham Lincoln. And he said, upon the subject of education, I can only say that I view it as the most important subject we as people may be engaged in. And I think that that says everything. As we think about the world going forward, we're becoming more and more interconnected all the time, and also the challenges we face can only be addressed through working together to solve problems. And higher education gives us tools to solve those problems. So really looking forward to tonight's opportunity to get together and have a conversation about higher education at this point in time in world history. We have two special guests tonight to talk about this and also to share their ideas with you. I would like to make a special welcome to our U.S. speaker, Dr. Dooley, the Chancellor of Purdue Global, and I will share his bio in just a few minutes, and also a special welcome to our Bangladeshi guests, Dr. Shamsad Mortuza from ULAB. We're thrilled to have both of them with us this evening. Before we get started, I just wanted to go through some of the ground rules. If you participated in one of our programs before, you may be familiar with them. They're in the chat box, but I'll go through them just in case. First, as soon as you entered, we have muted everyone, so you aren't able to unmute yourself. We would ask that, and we do this to make the program go really smoothly, and also so that we can take and manage as many questions as possible in the short time we have together. If you have questions or you have concerns, please enter your information, your question, concerns, comment into the chat box, and someone from the public affairs section in Dhaka, who we're on the call. We have a number of people on the program. We also have representatives from EMK, the Edward M. Kennedy Center, also supporting this, this event. And between the two teams, we will be responsive to your questions. We would ask that you don't record this session. We will be recording it, so you don't need to. For those of you that would like different types of interpretation, we're offering sign language interpretation. And also, if you need simultaneous interpretation, you just go down to the bottom of your screen across the bar at the bottom. There's a little world, a globe. Select interpretation, select the language you want to hear. If I'm speaking in English and you want English, you don't have to change anything. But if you want to hear Bangla, then you need to select Bengali and then click on the mute original. Also, we would invite you that if you have a different name as your sign-in name and you would rather have your own personal name, please go ahead and make that change now. We have information in the waiting room about how to do that. I'm looking to see if there's any other things that I should mention. Also, tonight is all about higher education. So if you have questions about other things, sometimes people, okay, someone said, please make clear the focus of tonight's meeting. Good question. So tonight we have two speakers talking about kind of the future of higher education at this point in time. We have, as I mentioned, we have Dr. Dooley, who I'll introduce in a second, and we have Dr. Shamsad, and they're both going to talk about kind of what different universities are doing and different approaches for higher education at this point, this very complicated time, unprecedented time in world history. So I don't want to take up too much time with that, but hopefully that gives everyone an introduction. If you, again, if you have questions, comments, please enter them in the chat box. And let me describe really quick the format. We are going to have some short opening remarks from my colleague, the Cultural Affairs Officer, Isabel Joldos, who is, she oversees our educational portfolio at the embassy. After she speaks, I will introduce our two guests, and then Dr. Dooley will give about a 30-minute presentation. Followed by that, Dr. Shamsad will give about a 10-minute reaction. But at the same, all during this time, you can go ahead and put your questions and comments in the chat box, and we will get to them as we have time. So again, we're thrilled to have you, so many of you joining us, and we look forward to a really interesting conversation and sharing of ideas and viewpoints tonight. Without further ado, Isabel, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for attending this presentation. I wish you and your families ongoing safety and productivity during this challenging time. As Arlisa mentioned, I manage the exchanges portfolio, which is very, very active. We administer a variety of programs, which I believe you're familiar with, the Fulbright Humphrey programs. We manage the alumni programs to promote ongoing engagement of our U.S. alumni. We manage the Education USA program and the English language programs, including the Access program. We have been planning a session or a series of interventions on higher education for several months. Our planning, the focus of our planning shifted as the COVID pandemic hit us, and we changed our focus to addressing the greatest and most urgent global need, which is for transitioning to virtual platforms to allow our educational institutions all over the world to continue to provide quality education. Thank you to all of you who completed the survey of identifying your needs. They fell into three categories. Technology issues, including connectivity, no networks, which are technology issues. A second category that the needs fell into were process knowledge concerns, need for designing evaluation methodologies in a virtual platform, addressing plagiarism, matching curriculum design to a virtual format. The third area were people issues, how to motivate students, the psychological aspects of learning on a virtual platform, and time management. All of these are common concerns, although some to more extent than others in certain settings. We're happy to say that we're going to be addressing these issues in the series of speaker programs. Today's program, Reimagining Higher Education in a Post-COVID-19 World, is the first of a planned series of 4 programs. Our second program will be transitioning to online learning, tips and best practices with a focus on STEM education. Our third planned program, this program is anticipated to take place in November. We'll have 2 other programs which may take place in the early part of next year. Student-centered virtual learning is the third topic, and the fourth topic will address development of online assessment tools for virtual monitoring and assessment. We know that that Bangladeshi higher education institutions and leaders have already been working hard to address the challenges of transitioning to an online platform. There are 41.9 million affected by learners affected by the pandemic, and 3.3 million of them are in tertiary education studies at this point. A2I is working in collaboration with the Ministry of Education and the ICT division to develop a virtual classroom platform to mimic a actual classroom called a virtual classroom. So we are aware of these and other initiatives that educators are taking to address and tailor the needs of designing virtual platforms for Bangladesh. Please enjoy this session. We encourage you to ask many questions and to participate in the rest of our series. We will be providing links to ongoing resources and tools for you to use. And we thank you and congratulate you for taking on this challenge to transform our education system into a virtual one. The virtual platforms will continue even once we have resolved the issue of a COVID pandemic, and let us take tonight's as a step to learning how to take advantage of the virtual platforms available to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Isabel. As Isabel said, this is the first in what we see as an ongoing series about higher education and the future of higher education. We're really excited you could join us, and we're thrilled to have Dr. Dooley with us. We wanted to have someone who shared the experiences that you all are facing, and from a US perspective, which I think when you hear from Dr. Dooley, you will see that there are a lot of similarities between the two systems. Even though we're in two different countries, the challenges are the same. So looking forward to that. Let me really quick go through Dr. Dooley's bio, and then we'll turn the time to him so we can spend more time with him. Okay, Dr. Frank Dooley is the Chancellor of Purdue University Global. He oversees academics for approximately, I said 30,000 before, but the bio corrects me, 31,000 students, most of whom are earning their degrees online. Purdue Global is part of the Purdue University system. And anyone who knows anything about US education knows that Purdue University system is one of the most highly ranked public research universities in the United States. Its flagship is located in West Lafayette, Indiana. Prior to becoming Purdue Global Chancellor, Dr. Dooley was the Senior Vice Provost for Teaching and Learning at Purdue University, where he earned an international reputation as being a gifted and innovative teacher as well as a creative researcher. He has so many great accomplishments. Because of time, I'm going to skip over them, but we can share his full bio. But what I wanted to share a little bit with you is just his focus on students, and also he has done other things besides this. So he's published chapters in 6 books and more than 200 articles and other publications. And anyways, I don't want to take up too much time, but he also was featured in a podcast. So I don't know how many of you guys watch podcasts. Or listen to podcasts. I'm a huge podcast fan. So I'm just going to show you on my cell phone. Everyone probably has your iPhone. I don't know if you can see, but there's a podcast app. Dr. Dooley and I will put it in I'll put it in the chat box. He introduced me to a program called the Ed Up Experience, and he is featured on here on a conversation about student mentoring, and it's a great program. I just listened to it this morning. So again, we're thrilled to have Dr. Dooley with us to kick off our series on higher education and kind of this changing environment due to the COVID pandemic. Dr. Dooley, the time is yours. Thank you.
Alyssa, Isabella, thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm just delighted to be with everyone tonight. And, you know, I have a slideshow that I'll share for a few minutes, and then we will, I'll start, turn it over to Shamsad, who we had the opportunity to spend some time together last week, and we share the same concerns. We have the same issues that we're facing, but I'll give you the perspective that I dealt with at West Lafayette. And let me just work here for 1 second. All right, and hopefully you now see slides. Is that right? All right, I'm going to presume because I'm not hearing from anybody, but here we go.
Dr. Dooley, we can see you.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. All right, so, and I'm gonna quickly, the title that I came up with is Reimagining Higher Education in a Post-COVID-19 world. And I like that Alyssa said, well, we're not sure what that means. And it probably reflects hope, because I think what everyone is really trying to do these days is trying to be hopeful. And I think many of us want to get beyond this, because it has been difficult. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about how we reacted. So I took my new job on May 1 of this year, but prior to that, I was at the Senior Vice Provost at West Lafayette. And I'm going to talk how we transitioned in the spring, and it probably is very similar to what you had to do. And then similar to what Isabella spoke about, I'm going to speak about how we can think going forward by contemplating people, process, and technology. And I want to simply take the opportunity to thank Dr. Shamsad Mortuza. I think he's going to bring a perspective and some insights that will be very helpful to this conversation. So let me start real quickly by, Alyssa explained what Purdue University is, and this is a map of the state of Indiana. And if you go into the very upper left corner, there's a star there. That's basically Chicago. So to give you a reference point for where we are, there is a Purdue system, and Purdue is most known for the campus at West Lafayette, which is a large research STEM-centric university, one of the best engineering schools in the world. Almost 46,000 students in West Lafayette. I am the chancellor of an online institution that Purdue runs called Purdue Global. And you said 31,000. I need to update my bio because we have been growing like crazy. And I think in part it's due to COVID. We're now up to 35,000 students. And then we have some regional campuses across the state of Indiana that are another almost 22,000. So combined, we're almost 102,000 students. So last spring, just to refresh our memories, which seems like a century ago in many respects, the world started watching what was going on and trying to understand the emergence of the corona virus. And at first we, well, it's just another version of SARS, or it's another version of swine flu or something. This will pass and we don't need to worry. But as time went from January into February, I have a team of people that work for me, and I call them the Innovative Learning Team. And when I use the word team, I'm very deliberate because they bring very different perspectives. So in the room are people who are experts in instructional technology. In the room are people who are specialists in assessment, specialists in pedagogical design, and I also always had several professors who were teaching at that point in time. And on March 2nd, and what we do typically would be doing is this group would be working on projects to improve the teaching and do faculty development on the West Lafayette campus so we could be better at our work.
Dr. Dooley,
yes.
Could I interrupt you just for a second?
Yes.
Do you want to share your screen so that we forward your slides, or do you want to forward your slides? Some people are just asking. I think they want to see the slide you mentioned about Indiana, and it didn't go forward.
It didn't go forward? Oh, I'm already too beyond that.
I know, but maybe you could just show it really quick and go on to where you are.
Well, in mine, is it not showing as Alyssa?
I can see it on the side, but I can't see it in the main.
Well, that is curious to me because I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to start again. How does that sound?
Okay. Give us a moment, everyone. Thanks for your patience. I think everyone has been on these. It's a little complicated sometimes. Give us one moment.
Well, no, you have to go with the person you're working with, and sometimes you might need a smarter person.
I doubt that, but machines sometimes outsmart us all.
All right, I'm going to,
Oh, perfect, perfect.
all right, there's
Oh,
Indiana.
fun is we can see the Indiana slide.
All right, good, good. So that's Indiana. And if you go to the upper left corner, that's Chicago. So the center of the country is where we are. Now, did it advance?
Yes.
All right, great. Thank you very much. So I talked about the team, and it was March 2nd, and I was worried. And I'm not sure why I was worried, but I had this team, and I pulled them into a meeting, and I said, we need a plan to move every course that we teach in West Lafayette to be online in the next 2 weeks. And they thought I was crazy. But we started talking about that on March 2nd. On March 13th, the campus ended face-to-face instruction for West Lafayette, and we sent all the students home for the rest of the semester. We had 5,000 courses that we taught from West Lafayette in the spring. And what we did, somebody asked the question, what do you mean when you say remote instead of online or distance? We were very intentional in using the word remote because we didn't want people to think that what they were doing in a very quick, this is a triage situation or emergency situation, and we were doing the best that we could. And I'm confident that anyone in the room who's teaching from Bangladesh did the same last spring. You did the best that you could in a short amount of time. But in no way were these fully developed online courses in the normal process we would go through. So, and we convinced the students of that because you had to set the expectation for the students, but we also wanted to set expectations for the faculty. We did it. We stumbled through. Then May 9th came, the semester ended. We took a sigh of relief. And on May 11th or 12th, we started transitioning our courses to build them for fall because we knew we would have to have online capability in fall. Over the summer, we did build courses to be fully online as opposed to simply this word that I'm going to use as remote. We had some things that helped us a great deal relative to other universities in the United States. We had a program that we started this in 2012. It's called IMPACT, which means Instruction Matters Purdue Academic Course Transformation. The IMPACT program, and there are materials that I've shared with Alyssa and links that you can learn much more about it. It is a very rich program. It's winning national awards. I really think it's a faculty development program, and we center on three things. We take a cohort of faculty and we work with them for 1 semester. In that time, we spend about a month asking the individual, what are you trying to accomplish in your particular course as part of a curriculum? And by that, what are the learning objectives of the course and how does it tie to the rest of your curriculum? The second month then, we spend time talking about, now that you've told me what your objectives are, can you also talk to me about how are you planning to evaluate or assess the student learning? And then the last third of our time with the faculty is we spend to them talking about different technologies or approaches that they might use to engage students in their learning. We had 500 people have gone through this program, and roughly I have 2,000 faculty teaching on the West Lafayette campus, so it's about a quarter. I have 65 academic departments, and what this meant is, literally speaking, I had at least 2 or 3 people in each and every department. So one of the advantages I had when we were moving remote, I was able to say to the departments, go down the hall and talk to Dr. Reynolds or talk to Dr. Mortuza, because there was somebody that they knew who could give them guidance on what they should be doing. And that was an immense advantage for us. A second advantage, in the United States, there is an organization called the University Innovation Alliance. It is 11 large universities. We're all publics, but we're focused on improving teaching. And we've been part of this alliance since 2013. And what the innovation part meant, we have tested many different ways, and it has given us this approach to looking at our teaching, look at our advising and student support systems to see, are we doing our job the best that we can? Now, while even having these advantages, I still had challenges. The first challenge we had was assessment. Out of those 5,000 courses, only about 20% of them had been through the impact process, meaning I had 80% of my courses, the faculty were still used to giving large, high stakes exams, and now I'm telling them, you can't do that. Or if you're going to do it, you have to open your exam. It has to, all the exams were online. And that what it, assessment is a very big challenge, and I'm glad to see they're going to have another session that zeroes in on the importance of assessment. The second challenges we ran into, we call accessibility. And there's a number of issues that arise. The first was we had families where the students went home, their parents were home from work, they might have had brothers or sisters who also, and everyone in the family was supposed to be on the internet at the same time. And we found many cases where they just didn't have the bandwidth in their home, or they didn't have the capability that everyone could do that. So that was a large challenge for us. The second one is Purdue West Lafayette. About 12% of the undergraduate students are international from all over the world. Many of them went home in mid-March, and now we're dealing with time zones across the world when you're trying to give, let's say, an exam or a homework. So the professor in West Lafayette might post it, at 9 a.m., not realizing that I'm asking somebody in the rest of the world to do this assignment in the middle of the night, perhaps for them. A third problem, and I think we're all facing this still, is just the problem of fatigue, right? This has been tiring, and it just is relentless, and we don't see an end. So those are challenges, and I'm confident that all of us in the conversation tonight have the same challenges. So now what I'd like to do is shift the focus, and there's an old saying that we should never waste a crisis, and it sounds a little bit harsh, but the reality is what COVID has presented to us is the opportunity to rethink our work. And in many ways, transitions that might have taken years to accomplish, we've been forced to do literally in weeks. And our frustration is with what we've done is it doesn't meet our expectations of quality. So there is a guiding process, thought process to how we should be approaching these questions, and it involves 3 dimensions: people, process, and technology. And in this case, most of the technology is going to be an information technology. It's a systems-based approach. It's integrative. It's collaborative. You find it in many different industries. You find it in government. It makes a lot of sense once you think about it in this way, but it is very difficult to attain. And I think the great difficulty, Arlissa and the embassy staff shared with me the virtual classroom that's been developed in Bangladesh. And that's a wonderful development, and that is going to enable you to accomplish things. But in many cases, we find in other cases that we come with a technology solution, and then we find that it doesn't work. And it's not that the technology doesn't work. The technology can be very high quality, but if you ignore the interaction with people and process, the technology is going to have a hard time meeting your expectations. So I'll elaborate a little bit on that. Let me talk about people for a moment. Most of our institutions have a mission statement or our goal statement for our strategy. And oftentimes we talk about the importance of our people, the importance of our faculty, the importance of our staff to our students. And I think that's very, very true. But as I look across higher ed, especially in the United States, there are many universities who have severe budget pressures right now. And the first thing that they're doing is they're letting faculty go, letting the continuing lectures, they're not renewing contracts. So while we say people matter, at times the employees or the faculty might be questioning us. Do we really mean that when we've told them, no, I don't need your services anymore? And oftentimes, I'll say especially in industry situations, there is a concern that the technology may be replacing them in their work. Industry folks, and I'm an economist by training, so I spend all kinds of time thinking of productivity. Productivity is a very simple measure, but it's powerful. But there's only two ways to improve it. Either you have to have more output per person, and that might mean putting more students in each of the classes that you teach, or making you teach more sections of the classes, or I get rid of employees. And that's how our finance people tend to think of these things. The second is process. And when we talk about process, you get outside of higher education, and there was things like total quality management. There's an ISO, which is an international standards organization, Six Sigma, lean manufacturing. All of these things talk about standardizing processes to make them more effective. There are examples in higher education. There is work around predictive analytics, for example, and the predictive analytics is something that we've worked on as part of our work in the University Innovation Alliance. What it does is it will track the performance of students in particular classes, and it will alert you to students who are underperforming, so you can reach out to them while they're still in the class and see, is there an ability to remedy them or help them in the midst of a class instead of waiting for them to fail the class. There are e-tutoring systems that have been developed that, once again, we find on West Lafayette that the engineering students, the biggest problem they have is our students are so smart that they don't know how to ask for help. And one of the things we did for them is we built to them, it looks like a social media page for engineering students. But in reality, what it is a help room or a tutoring room, and they go to this room and work problems. It's staffed 24/7, and all of a sudden, in my mechanical engineering, for example, some of the smartest students in the world, in their sophomore sequence of courses, 30% of them were getting a grade of a D or an F. And once we opened up this tutoring center, that is a web page for them, and they don't think of it as a help room, that DF rate has dropped to only 12% of the students. So and it's simply helping them to ask the question. So all of our motivation about changing a process is to improve student success. And then last but not least is the notion of technology. And then I see many, chancellors and provosts and folks in the conversation, and I'm confident if my email, it's almost every day somebody from an IT company is trying to sell me a new system. And we have many of these systems in place, a learning management system, a student, and it's almost overwhelming in how reliant we become on technology. In addition to that, there are pedagogical IT solutions that, and if there are some virtual reality systems, there's the university called Case Western, who is teaching their med students. They have built a virtual reality cadaver. So rather than doing cadaver labs today, you're able to work with the cadaver in a virtual reality. So they put the goggles on, and it's incredible what they're able to do. We have a number of technologies at West Lafayette that we have put in place. There's a peer grading system for writing assignments and they all seem to be very effective at improving learning. Now, in theory, when we think of people, process, technology, and I talked about this as being a systems approach, that they're interwoven, and you shouldn't be thinking of doing one without contemplating changes to the other. But the reality when we approach this, technology, for example, a simple technology we're all using is Zoom, all right? And there may be people who are very adept, but at the beginning of this, Alyssa had to stop me because my slides weren't showing, all right? Why do we run into problems? Well, as a faculty member, I might have had a syllabus that said how I was going to teach, and it didn't contemplate this technology, all right? And if I don't make adjustments to that, I might not use the technology most effectively. The other way to think about it, at West Lafayette, we looked at our grading policies. Once we changed the way we were doing examinations in the spring, using a different technology, for example, moving exams from being in a classroom to all being online, in all honesty, our faculty and myself don't trust proctoring, right? And we were worried about cheating. So we had to rethink how we're going to administer exams and give grades. And in many courses, what we did is instead of awarding an A, a B, or a C for their marks, we went to a pass or fail. And then finally, people. And people are probably the thing that we typically overlook. And in a university, we have two sets of people to be concerned about. Number one are the students, and we talk about them now as being a generational shift, Gen Z, and they look at the world very different than somebody like myself, who's a boomer, but we're trying to change these technologies with the perspective that both of us need to understand what we're doing. So a reminder, we start always, it seems, these problems or these opportunities by looking at technology. But it's still the three of them, as I've tried to say. One of the things that industry has found over and over and over again, they believe that the technology makes these great promises, but the gains are rarely realized. And I think the reason they're not is because we don't spend enough time thinking about the people in the process. But hope springs eternal, right? We're still optimistic. We still think we can solve every problem in front of us. So why is process a challenge? Oftentimes what happens is when you put a new technology in place, you don't rethink the process that you have. And think about simply something like grading, all right? Oftentimes our approaches are driven either by custom or by a policy. So let me go back to the, we talked about giving grades as A's, B's, C's, and D's. Now all of a sudden we talk about grading on a pass-fail basis. That was very uncomfortable to faculty. They said, how will I know who deserves to get honors awards and things like this? And we can get bogged down when we change a process. The other thing that can be problematic is sometimes the people who build the software for us build a process into it that we're not comfortable with, or we think doesn't reflect the reality of teaching. So that's why process can be such a great challenge. People, well, we all work with people and we all love people. At the same time, we always find people to be a challenge. One of the things that can be a challenge is a hiring standard. If you have a human resources department, what are they interested? They tend to be interested in, do they have the right degree to allow them to teach, industrial engineering or computer science? But maybe the relevant question is how much have they taught, right? The other thing is, how do you view training? Do you view training and faculty development as an expense, or do you view it as an investment? And that's a philosophical difference. It's very important to the way you approach it. So I think in higher ed today and going forward, technology is probably going to become critical to the way we approach our work. But once again, I am simply going to say it's only a precondition. You shouldn't rely on having a technology as a solution that you build off of it. And when you build off of it, you build off of by having trained people and logical processes. So I'll go back. With a process, are you going to rethink how we award grades? Are you going to rethink how you engage students? Are you going to think how maybe different populations of students need different types of support? In the United States, the students who have gone home and live in two-parent families and are higher income and maybe even have a tutor at home seem to be doing just fine. They miss college. They miss their friends, their interactions. On the other hand, when we look at populations of students who are low income, we call them first-generation college students. We're really worried that they might be left behind because of COVID. People. I'm going to go back. I actually think if you're going to make the investment in virtual classroom, the next investment to make is how are you training the faculty to work with the system, to use it effectively? Let me give you one example at Purdue Global. Every web page, so it's an online university, so every course comes with a web page, but the home page or the shell is identical for every class. And what that means for us, when a student goes to their class, they know where to find assignments, they know where to find course policies, they know where to find lecture materials, because they don't have to hunt around. The reality in West Lafayette last spring, we had 2,000 different faculty members building their own web pages, and a lot of the challenge that students had was simply finding stuff on these different pages because we didn't have a consistent approach. So all of these things matter. Our lives are not going to get any easier anytime soon, but we do have the opportunity to rethink a traditional approach. And by that, I think that the way I would suggest you approach this is by contemplating how the intersection of people, process, and technology allows us to improve our work. And I will stop there, Alyssa, and turn it back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Dooley. That was great. I love the concept of people, processes, and technology. I think, as you described, I think it applies in so many sectors. As a diplomat, it certainly applies in the work that we do. So thank you. I love the concept. And we'll come back to that. But let me introduce our reactor. As I mentioned at the beginning, the way that we've structured this discussion is having Dr. Dooley go first and giving a presentation about what his institution and what he's seen in the United States as they, as U.S. universities go try to make this transition to teaching and learning in this new environment. And now we've asked Dr. Shamsad Mortuza to speak, to react to what Dr. Dooley has shared with us and also share his thoughts. So let me introduce, I know many of you are already familiar with Dr. Shamsad, but let me share a brief bio. He is an educator, translator, columnist, poet, editor, and academic administrator based in Dhaka. He was appointed as the Pro-Vice-Chancellor of the University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh, ULAB, by the Chancellor of Universities and President of the Government of Bangladesh in September 2018. He's currently on leave from the University of Dhaka. He started his career in 1994 at his alma mater, and I will slaughter the name, Jahangir Nagar University. Oh, yeah, so that's a lot of syllables. He also attended, high five, Dr. Shamsad. We are alumni of the same university. So he attended my alma mater. We share an alma mater, the University of Arizona, where he got a second master's in American Indian Studies as a Fulbright Scholar. So we consider him one of ours, close to our hearts. And maybe I'll stop there since our time is short, but he's an editor of the ULAB Journal of English Studies, Crossing and Serves. He's a panel reviewer for the Journal of Commonwealth Literature. He writes a popular column, Blowing in the Wind, for the Daily Star, and many other things, 30 articles in peer-reviewed journals. And we're so thrilled to have you with us, Dr. Shamsad. Go ahead, your floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So hello there, good evening, good morning. So it's an extreme honor to share this virtual platform with Dr. Frank Dooley and listen to his vision on higher education in a post-COVID world. Thank you, American Center, for this laudable initiative and bringing in the Chancellor of Purdue University Global for the opening gambit. Before I forget, let me begin by thanking all the people who worked behind the scene to make this happen. Ms. Arlisa Reynolds, Brenda Francis, Amanda Quigg, Isabel Zaldus, Rahana Sultana, and many others. Thank you for zooming us all in. Now, is this just another meeting on a topic that has been thrust on us? There has been so many borderless meetings, so in the last 7 months, that it seems that we are experiencing deja vu, like Neo in the Matrix trilogy, and deja vu in the future is a worrying sign. If you have seen the Matrix, you would know that, you're hearing the same thing over and over again, and it has become part of our everyday diet. Now, universities all over the world have been struggling for the last 50 years to popularize remote learning with a very little success. Even MOOC and other online courses were viewed with suspicion. Suddenly, online teaching is a bandwagon that everybody wants to join. For some institutions, it is the only way you can secure your investment in higher education. It is a kind of do or perish kind of scenario, and especially for the private institutions, like the one I'm involved with right now. The public system, on the other hand, has been relatively slow in responding to the crisis, even though Dr. Dooley said that every crisis is an opportunity, but there has been relatively slow in responding to the situation. Why? Because their existence is not under immediate threat. Now, as the survey, when you entered this room, you had to answer some questions. And I was looking at the reports. Almost all universities are adopting to the new normal. In the last few months, we have managed to learn the use of Microsoft 360 or G Suite, or incorporate free LMS such as Moodle, or to have somewhat shaky transition from face-to-face learning to online teaching. So just like Dr. Dooley was saying that our initiative also started in March, and some of us even had to use social media. So we did not have LMS. So some of us even had to use Facebook for, so sharing our lectures. We use Gmail, we use YouTube, and because the show must go on. But things are getting better, as is reflected in the survey. So when you look at the survey, so most of them have said, it's either good, moderate, if not excellent, but, so we are there. So most of us have, most of you have expressed your satisfaction in terms of teaching, pedagogy, and student engagement. Now, let me share some thoughts on my current institution's ULAB before reacting to Dr. Dooley's presentation. So in March, we had about 2 weeks, of physical classes to establish an online protocol with our students. So we conducted a survey among our students to understand their accessibility to digital devices and the internet. We then developed a teacher help teachers model. So we did not have the alliance, as Dr. Dooley was saying, but we had a makeshift arrangement of teacher help teachers model, where we relied mostly on our faculty members who have studied abroad. So they had some experience of teaching online or working as a TA. So they brought in that experience and we learned from one another. So that was the model that we adopted at ULAB. And we had 2 teams, one central unit, and then we had a departmental unit. So for each department, so the central team would train, a leader, and that person would, replicate the ideas at a department level. So that's how we started. And simultaneously, we had student training because they also needed to know how to enter a Google Classroom, how to upload assignments, so how to be aware of plagiarism checker, because they did not have the inbuilt plagiarism checker earlier. So when we're giving this, CT exams, so they did not have to worry about plagiarism. But suddenly, so because of the online platform, you have to go through this plagiarism checker or turn it in. And that becomes a huge issue for students because they are used to, some form of grading, and suddenly, there is this new reality, with which they had to cope. So that required some sort of orientation. And then we also needed to have the e-tutoring, so the online support service. So again, it was kind of a makeshift arrangement. So there was a 24/7, like, email service. So again, it was voluntarily done. We did not have the system in place, but our colleagues were extremely helpful. They were extremely enthusiastic. So they're doing the tutorials themselves online, going to YouTube videos, learning those ideas and bringing them back to our students. So that's how we started, and it was a bumpy ride, I must admit. So I would be lying if I said that the transition was seamless. But the major stumbling block was UGC, the University Grant Commission. Why? Because they were skeptic about our assessment process. So we had to convince them that our grading system is formative. So we do rely on different modes of testing. But in the public universities, so the exams are mostly summative. So they have the final exams and the midterms, but they don't have the in-class tutorials and all that. So we had to convince them that, okay, so we already have this system in place. And again, the issues of, as Dr. Dooley was saying, that is someone else helping the student. So the divide, the digital divide that we talked about, that the first generation students are at a different stage because the well-off students are being helped by someone else. So how do you address that issue? So, and UGC, is very right to express that concern. And at the same time, so Dr. Dooley mentioned the virtual classroom developed by A2I, UGC. So they came together to come up with some sort of virtual solution. For example, they came up with the internet package, so with negotiation with one of the telecom companies. They also tried to use the television, for online teaching, but I think that did not go that well. Now, Dr. Dooley's presentation on Purdue's design and learning model so draws our awe and inspiration. The Innovative Impact Program for Active Learning is one of the major takeaways from tonight's presentation. He has rightly highlighted the right balance between people, process, and technology. Now, from what we have seen, that this PPP model is not often maintained here in Bangladesh. So I'll be very honest. Say, for example, government invests in technology without ensuring the process or empowering the people. At Dhaka University, my former chair is here, Professor Rubina Khan, so she can, attest to that. So we got a smart board, so under HECA project. And over the last few years, that has been reduced to a PowerPoint screen because nobody is using that smart board, right? So you have the investment in technology, but there was not enough training, available. The process was not there. And in the process, so the technology was misused. On the other hand, there is a widening gap between the technologically challenged senior professors who are on the verge of their retirements. And then you have the tech-savvy young teachers, but they do not have the experience of the senior professors. So how do you make that balance? So when you talk about people, so this is something that, as an administrator, I have to deal with. So you have a senior professor with years of experience, and suddenly he becomes obsolete, in this, netizen world. Now, how do you accommodate that kind of experience? And this is exactly what Dr. Dooley was talking about, the loyalty. So someone has given so much effort and services to the building of an institution, and suddenly, you do not have a place for that person. So Dr. Dooley has asked, how do we value the loyalty of our employee? And then, how do you measure the output of a teacher who does not have the technical inputs? So if you really measure the input-output equation. And Dr. Dooley further asked, do new technologies or processes enhance our people or replace them? Now, the fear that AI will replace human teachers has been around for some time. We have consoled ourselves saying that a machine can never have the human empathy. Therefore, it is impossible for a machine to fully replace human inputs. Dr. Dooley has also encouraged us to be empathetic to all stakeholders, to our students, to our admins, everyone. So somehow COVID-19 has instigated a warp drive. With exponential speed, we have reached the singularity that converges man with the machine. Now my iPhone is my prosthetic tentacle to sense the world. Are we really going to enter a dystopian world after the COVID-19? Or do we use technology as a stopgap solution? My personal opinion is that our pre-technology innocence has been lost due to this novel coronavirus. It will be difficult to return to a pre-COVID teaching model. Unless we evolve with technology, we will be extinct as educators. Thankfully, Dr. Dooley has given us some practical tips to upgrade the process, and he has also shared his optimism. The central argument of his presentation involves the PPP model, a tripartite relationship involving people, process, and information technology. We can certainly learn from the award-winning pedagogical model of Purdue. Surely we can also have a University Innovation Alliance. Now the problem arises when we try to replicate a system or even the best practices of OECD countries that has not developed organically. For instance, the assessment, so Dr. Dooley was talking about the improvement that he has seen after the support service was given. Now in North America, they have the bell curve practices, right? So you have to there's this, when I was a TA in the US, so I was told by my professor that, so we need to maintain a bell curve. Now you're trying to empower some students from Ds and Fs to say Bs. Now what if the concentration of Bs, there is a spike in that middle range? How do you address, because you're already using a model and then you're introducing something that might change the equilibrium. So that's just like one example. And I also agree that we need to take a baby steps for any significant change. But then again, so the situation is so overwhelming that we need to change our entire education system, and that needs a wholesale renovation. We can always go for a pick and choose model with which we are approaching our online teaching right now, but it can only work when we change our attitudes and mindsets. Now take the idea of a flipped classroom, for example. We are used to a spoon-feeding model of teaching where the lecturer talks like a sage on the stage and the students simply consume. Now this has made our students as nothing but passive listeners. Now thanks to data saving mode, now we do not even know whether our students are really there on the other side of the black mirror. Most of our classrooms are becoming a virtual monologue. And I will be keen on understanding from either the speaker or the august audience how this online teaching can be sustainable. Now, do we really go for a hybrid model once this pandemic is over? What residual effects of COVID will last in the days to come? So with these questions, I would like to end my reaction. So the term reacted is something new to me, so I tried to react. And so over to Arlisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shamsad. I loved it. And I wish I would have written down, you had a poet moment. And I was like, I loved it. But I really appreciated your thought about it will be difficult to ever go back to a pre-COVID world. I do think, and I think educators more than anyone would understand that once you learn something, you can't really unlearn it. And so some of these lessons that we're all learning right now, hopefully we're taking them to heart and learning from them and really maybe changing the world as a result. But I think change is hard. So we have so many questions. I'm going to try to group them in groups so that we can address as many. So I'm sorry if I don't ask your exact question, but I'm going to try to put them all together. So there were several questions that dealt with kind of what does the new normal look like? One person asked, right now, there are companies like Google and Facebook, they're hiring people without university degrees, and that they want micro skills that don't require a university degree. how do you envision the new future? There's others that talk about, we're talking about, in some cases, reimagining the future, but what about going back to old practices? And so I guess my question, and I'll turn first to Dr. Dooley just because he's had a moment to rest, and Dr. Shamsad, if you want to add in, like, what do both of you see as the new normal for education? And related to that, there are questions about, do you see the current, do you see the pre-COVID online, campus experience, do you see that disappearing forever? Or do you see a hybrid? Or what do you think the new normal is?
That's a great question. And I think it's a question that everyone's pondering. I had one person tell me that it's going to be the new abnormal. And I mean, the new normal, to a certain extent, reflects that everybody wants to return to where we were. I mean, that's something that we're centered on, or something we're familiar with. What I like that Shamsad shared about the sage on the stage, the impact program that we use tries to change the professor from being the sage on the stage, and the word that we are trying to use with impact is the guide on the side. And so this might be part, and as he said, everyone spends too much time looking at screens all day, and it's exhausting. There isn't the human interaction, but we find one of the things with impact, we didn't presume that every course should be face-to-face, or every course should be hybrid, or every course should be fully online. We actually were agnostic to the notion of the delivery. What we tried to think of, a course really has two components, and one is the delivery of information and knowledge, and then the second is the demonstration by the student that they understand what you're trying to accomplish. But to get to that second part, it actually requires of the faculty that we provide feedback. So many of the courses that the most common model on the West Lafayette campus that has emerged is what we would call the hybrid model, or the flip model. And even before COVID, we had many classes where the professors had taped their lecture and the lecture was available. And we find a couple of advantages in that. Number one, as I said earlier, about 12% of our students are international. If you come to the United States with English as a second language, there's always a jargon. And I know when I looked at my courses, I would evaluate, and some of the students who had more difficulty with language might watch my lecture 5 times. And then I would get an email that might ask a question, what does it mean to rub elbows, right? And rubbing elbows is simply, informal, people are trying to network informally is rubbing elbows. But I had used those words in a lecture, and he couldn't find it in the book. He couldn't understand the context for what I was talking about. And we also find that, lecture we have lecture halls on West Lafayette campus that hold 500 students. It is a very, we use the phrase death by PowerPoint, right? Because you go into these large rooms, you turn off the lights, and you start going through screens. Now we blame the students. Well, the students aren't paying attention, they're on their phones, etc. The reality is, when I was a student, the students were reading the student newspaper and doing crossword puzzles and things like that. So I don't think inattention to the lecture format is anything that is generational, that has changed. So I guess my message, Arlissa, is that the advantage is, I think a great advantage is, you can tighten up your lecture and really zero in on the key points. And then what becomes important is how you engage the students in the assessment. And I'm so glad you're having a session just dedicated on assessment, because there are so many different ways to be evaluating, but it's the combination of content and assessment and review that makes the course. And I think that's the direction we're headed in.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Shamsad, do you want to add to that?
No, I totally agree. And again, so when we talk about the new normal and abnormal, the hybrid model works, but with blended learning. So what I've seen that when you have a class with mixed ability, so that is a huge challenge, because we do not have the rigorous admission process, like the Western countries. And when you have students with mixed abilities, who needs hand-holding, who needs who needs basic understanding on things, and then you have some advanced students. So when you expect them to read at home, and when they come to the class without any preparation, so that becomes an issue, right? So I think if you enhance the e-tutoring, so if you can increase the, the process is very important. So when we talk about this tripartite, people, process, model and technology model, so you cannot do it simply with the higher education, unless you address the primary education, unless you address the, high schools, so the process must involve, all three, levels of education. So if you just think so that has been my experience, that, when we go for this, pick and choose, you like one idea. And so the death by PowerPoint, I totally agree. You go online, you find a slide, and you just customize it, and you just vomit it in a classroom, and without any contextualization, without any sensitivity. And we are actually doing a disservice to our students. Again, so if you remember, the point that I was trying to make, that whatever technology that we use, that must come organically, So what we have right now, so we have kind of a synthetic, incorporation of technology, and that is doing us a disservice, so that's my, humble opinion.
Thank you, both of you. You've covered a lot, and so maybe I want to unpack a little. There were a lot of questions about online assessment. So online assessment, also, how do you conduct exams? How do you proctor exams? And maybe, I don't know who wants to take this, but can one or both of you elaborate a little bit about how you see this developing? And I get Dr. Shamsad's point about some of this has to be organic, but I wonder if there are some tools, or are there some trends that either of you are seeing in higher education of how to approach developing those? And I know I get Dr. Dooley, I do think your structure of people, process, and technology, that's a great place to start. But maybe for those people who want maybe something that's maybe a longer process, is there something that you've seen already in practice that might give people some ideas or directions to go?
I'm not going to be very optimistic here. And by that, I think many people look to proctoring, online proctoring, as a solution, so it would allow me to give exams in the way I was used to when I had students in my classroom. And one of the things that we have questioned in our faculty, so let me move you to Purdue University Global, fully online institution, and there are two ways to track whether somebody is learning something. And in our traditional residential universities, the exam, the hour-long exam or the comprehensive exam is something very familiar to us. It's what we probably were educated with, so we're comfortable with that as a model. In many cases, you have to pass exams. There are entrance exams to be admitted to the university. There's entrance exams to go to graduate school or medical school, for example. So we all grow up in this world of being successful at taking tests. And then we look at the world we live with and we think, oh, we're good because our students also are good at taking tests. Now, the online proctoring software, it's very expensive. And from our experience, it's not very reliable. In other words, I think it was designed, the poor companies, just like Zoom, you know, Zoom had problems in the spring because the technology was not developed for classroom. The technology was not developed for the usage it was experiencing all of a sudden. Proctoring is probably a similar example. And I think proctoring software can work if you're contemplating how you're building the course. But to simply take an exam that I would have administered in a course and now use proctoring with it and think that's going to be the solution, I don't think that is the solution. So let me give an alternative. The alternative that what we have asked people to do is to think about, instead of 3 exams in your course, or in some courses it might have only been 1 exam, why don't you have projects and assignments due every week, or maybe twice a week? And in essence, we have, you know, cut the course into smaller components. And one of the advantages of that, it's harder to cheat, let's say, for example, if there might be 30 or 40 different assignments to evaluate rather than 2 or 3. And you also moved it from being a very high stakes environment to one that is relatively, each assignment might be only 2 or 3% of the grade. But the other advantage with it is, if somebody didn't grasp one of the early concepts in the course that's central to everything else that you're trying to teach, you have the ability to go in for that student early. And, you know, you might come back and say, I thought you were going to understand marginal revenue equals marginal cost and how we solve that problem, but the class didn't. So I failed as the teacher, and I'm going to reteach that so I can confident, because we can't do anything else until we have that concept down. And I think that that's something, so that is us rethinking our teaching. I go back, Alyssa, I think the key in teaching, whether it be online or face-to-face, and where maybe many universities in the United States have let students down in recent years, is we simply give you an exam, you have a score that says 92, oh, you did great, or you have a score that says 60, you did horrible, and I didn't tell you why you were good or why you were bad. And it's this notion of feedback, and we do find with this smaller, low stakes assessment and the assignments, we are trying to build feedback mechanisms in for the students so they can learn from their mistake. Now, I make that seem easy. Now, it's really hard and really time intensive. So I don't want to diminish this shift in approach, but it is the approach we use at Purdue Global. And the reason we do that is all of my students, on average, are coming back to school in their mid-30s. They started college when they're 18. Many of them failed out or dropped out as a young person because they didn't see the relevance, they couldn't afford it. And now they're older, and their bosses come to them and they might say, well, you know, Alyssa, you are a great worker, but you don't have a degree, so I can't give you a promotion. And so you would be coming back to me seeking the degree because it's important to your progression in your career. But if you were away from college, let's say for a decade, could you imagine coming back to a math class? And that your facial expression is exactly what our students face. So that's why we have rethought how we evaluate. And at the end of the day, and I can tell you, does it work or not? So I have a nursing program, and to be a nurse in the United States, you then have to take a board exam before they let you become a practicing nurse. And my pass rate on the board exam using this different method of evaluation or assessment is higher than many other universities in the country. So I think what it demonstrates, you can learn bit by bit instead of learning or demonstrating all at once. So that's rethinking, but guess what? This would say people, process, technology to rethink how this is done.
Thank you, Dr. Dooley. Dr. Shamsad, before, I'll let you have the floor, but let me, because our time is short, let me throw out a couple of ideas and things so that both of you can respond, because time flies when you're having a good time. So just to add to the question about online assessment, there have been a number of questions about how do you do research online? So if you need to have lab-based research, how do you do that in this new environment? How do you tackle plagiarism? And Dr. Shamsad, I know you addressed that a little with some online tools. So that's one group. And then I would like to bring up another set of questions. And there are many questions about this. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna highlight one. This is from Professor Sadiqa Halim from Dhaka University. She's the Dean of Social Science faculty and former commissioner of the Information Commission. And in her comment and question, it reflects so many that were raised here, that a challenge, and Dr. Dooley, I know from our personal conversations, you said that this is also a challenge in the US, that there are students that live places that they don't have electricity, or they don't have Wi-Fi access, they don't have access to devices. There may be other things that are happening. How do you address those issues, or what can universities do on that front? And then to add the bigger issue, there have been a few questions talking about, and Professor Sadiqa Halim also raised this, the mental health of our students. And I would also add I would say the mental health of professors and university staff as well. This is a tough time. Any solutions either of you can offer or discuss any of these areas? So again, kind of plagiarism, research online, and then how do we reach these students that they are in their villages or in a location they aren't connected, they feel disconnected, and then the mental health issue. So anyways, Dr. Shamsad, I'll let you tackle it, and then we'll go back to Dr. Dooley.
Oh, thank you. This is a serious issue. The trauma, we had to so have an additional counselor, because this pandemic is affecting us in so many different ways. It's unseen, they were unseen, and we are trying to learn to fly as we are flying. So that's how it is. But going back to the idea of assessment and the lab question, so this is a serious question, and we had a regional webinar with the Holling Center. I know Open University has some simulation program, but they're very expensive, even for engineering, for all the labs. So they have simulation for lab simulation. Unfortunately, even our best technical universities, they do not have those simulation programs. So maybe from the government, we can ask the government to have those simulations, because the way it is it's going to be prolonged. So the vaccine, even if it comes to Bangladesh, it's going to be another 2 years if you have to have that herd immunity or whatever the term is. So that's one thing. In terms of assessment, I do agree with Professor Dooley. In fact, that's exactly what I do in my own class. So we have chunked the assignments. For example, we have increased the number of open book assignments instead of this one big paper. So we are asking them to write short papers. And for example, the discussion board on Google Classroom, if you give a queue and you ask them to write 25 to 50 words responses. And the beauty of such an assignment is that they cannot copy from the internet, because they will be found out, because everybody is going to the same sources. So you need to come up with your own expressions. So that's number one. And then it becomes part of a journal. So if you do kind of a journal keeping, so end of this term, so they come up with a big paper, all these responses. So it becomes your leadership skills, your organization skills, like, so how we chaperone the, members and all that. So it becomes a combination of knowledge and skills. So this is the opportunity that, so the COVID is teaching us. And also the backward design. So as Dr. Dooley was saying that, if you have the outcome, what do you really want your students to take away from your class? So that's the most important question. Because our traditional system is mostly about rote learning, that, you memorize a big question and you simply reproduce it in your exam hall. So we need to get away from that. So the problem with the public universities is that because they have the bureaucratic system in place, so it's very difficult to change the mindset, not only the mindset, the entire system. So this is where it becomes problematic. And in the private system, we have the flexibility. We can bring changes very rapidly. Unfortunately, so even in the same country, we are creating, another form of discrepancy because we are allowing two systems to run side by side. And unless there is a strategic intervention, so this is going to be a big issue, so when, these people are entering the job market and so on.
Dr. Dooley, would you like to
Well,
those
yeah,
questions?
I think you asked about 2 days worth of questions with the one. Wonderful job. I mean, that's what I would do too. So I appreciate it. I agree entirely with Shamsad. Let me add a couple other things. There is some courses where there are simulation labs and we find them too expensive as well. I think there is some learning that simply is going to have to be face-to-face or in a lab, for example. And at some point, we're going to, we have a brand new chemistry and biology teaching lab on the West Lafayette campus. And historically, we would have had it open from, students would be working lab from 8 a.m. to about 5 p.m. To keep social distancing. And the West Lafayette campus has been open. We're still open. We have about 90% of the students came back to campus, and we're going to close in 3 weeks for the fall term. Our positivity rate is under 2%. That lab building, though, that normally would have run 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, is open 24/7. And so as a student, your lab might be at 2 o'clock in the morning, but when you go into the space, there's instead of being 25 people in the lab, there's only 6. And that allows us to maintain, and then we had to have longer time between each lab because everyone has to clean down but now, once again, we changed everybody's work. So we were very deliberate. We didn't want all of your courses to tell a student you have a class at 2 o'clock in the morning is not very comforting, and we had a lot of complaints, but we didn't know what else to do. Turns out the students didn't mind as much as the parents. So, the second thing, the plagiarism, I'll alert you to something we've discovered that should terrify all of us. A common thing that we're now finding is a student might find an answer that they plagiarized from somebody, and then they run it through Google Translate 5 or 6 times from language to language to language, that each translation slightly shifts it, and then in the last translation, they bring it back to English. I wish the students spent as much time on the assignment as they do figuring out how to cheat. I think with cheating, as faculty, we're just going to always have to be vigilant and attentive and adaptive, and it's a problem. And then the last thing I'll say, Alyssa, is you asked the question about mental health. One of the things that my professors at Purdue University Global do, it's an online institution. In reality, and I have students from all 50 states and actually across Canada as well. And many times you'll never meet anyone face to face in your program. The professors in each and every course that they're taking, though, have to check in with each student once a week. And it's not a check-in on their academic performance, so it could be that. It's more because most of these students are working adults, and they're checking to see, are you able to keep up? Is there anything that we should be concerned? And the things that we get concerned about is somebody, I have to work a lot of overtime, or I got fired, I got laid off from my job, or my child has COVID or something. So all of these things that we call them, life gets in the way. And what we find is that by having us check on you as an individual, that I think if we know that somebody is worried about us, it gives us a relief valve and it helps us deal with the stress. And it's a small thing, but it does seem to make a difference. We have not had an increase in requests for mental health assistance at Purdue Global. Now, that's not true at other places. I know that the stress that you talk about is a huge problem on many residential campuses and many homes. I don't know. I think we just have to take the time to be kind to one another, which maybe that's the lesson of the pandemic. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dooley. Dr. Shamsad, do you want to add anything? And then I'm going to ask you both to, basically we're going to have a debate, Indy, not a debate, but I'm going to give you like each 2 minutes to summarize and then we'll have to close. I'm sorry, we're just out of time.
I think like, many of the comments that I see involve the lack of internet penetration, especially in the remote areas or in the villages. So that's one thing, which is absolutely valid. Like, I have my colleague Arifa here, and she has a student who posted a photo on Facebook. So he was actually sitting by the river on a banyan tree just to get, signal for his phone. We had complaints from a student because he does not have a laptop. He just has a feature phone, and it normally takes 4 hours to type one assignment, and he cannot do formatting and all that. So there are issues like that, these are real issues. What we have done in the department, we have created a paid forward fund, so it's kind of a soft loan that we're giving. So our teachers, as Dr. Dooley was saying, that, we need to be kind to one another. So we are trying to reach out to our students and trying to help them in whatever way we can, because, this is the time to be human, so strangely, the virus is testing our humanity, right? So I think that's the only solution that we can have, unless we stick together as a race, I think, we'll be extinct, so this is a predatorial, virus, and the herd immunity is all about sticking together. So, that would be my answer to some of the questions that I have seen here.
Dr. Shamsad, why don't you go in and lead with your closing remarks, and then we'll go to Dr. Dooley. Do you have a closing statement or message for the group?
No, I shared the optimism of Dr. Dooley that, you need to have that hope in you. So hope springs, right? So you need to have that hope. And humanity is our last resort. So when you come together as a group, when you understand, what the other is doing and what the requirements are, so that's something that we need to do. And at the same time, we need to be innovative. So when I said that, it has to be organic. For example, what we did at ULAB, so we reached out to our colleagues abroad, whoever doing PhDs and all that. And so we had to ask them, how are you using your Canvas? How are you using your Blackboard? So Arifa takes care of our Moodle. So she is our Moodle trainer. So we had the Moodle, but nobody used Moodle, so because they were using it simply for calculating grades and all that. So it was kind of an extension of your Excel, but suddenly you have the added, urgency to use an online, LMS. And as Dr. Dooley was saying that, you hear all the vendors, pouring on your email boxes that, you need to have automation, you need to upgrade your system. This is the latest thing that is going on. So the student information service. So how do you make all those changes all at once when you have a student, trying to get signal for his phone sitting by a river, So do I really, invest on my students who is failing to purchase a device? or do I really upgrade my system and make sure that the automation is in place? So you have to strike a balance. And again, you cannot do it alone, right? So the challenge is unique, and we need a concerted effort. Unless all the agencies come together, and of course, we need to have the global partnership going so that we learn from the best practices abroad. And once we have that, so bridge built, only then we can, cross this obstacle. So that's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shamsad. Dr. Dooley, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. And I simply want to thank all the participants tonight. I've been trying to look at the questions as they come through, and the first thing I'll tell you, the questions are exactly the same set of questions that I would encounter in West Lafayette. So I think as professors and chancellors and administrators and officials from public government, we're facing the same challenges. And I think we have to come at them from the same perspective. I will simply close that I'm encouraged by what the State Department has put together in terms of the program, because I think they're addressing the right questions. And I would encourage folks to come back to the future sessions to learn more about student engagement, because that is one of the keys that will deal with the mental health concerns. It will deal with the digital divide. I also encourage you to come back and learn more about assessment, because my hunch is you're going to do more how you do it. And there are many people, I'm a person who gets to observe. In my role, I get to observe what's being done, and I get to go, oh, that looks good. And I'm not teaching anymore, so I can't, you shouldn't rely on me as being the best judge that does it actually work when you have to have it in your classroom. I'm going to return to the message, two messages. Number one, and I said this at my last, I think we need to be kind. And kindness and gratefulness and thanks to other people, and exactly what Shamsad just said. It's a time to show empathy for the student who doesn't have the advantage that others do. And it is a time for us then, the second word in addition to kindness is reflection. And we were used to having our lab, if you would, was to bring people into a university and put them into a classroom and put them into a lab and then evaluate them under this situation. And now we have to rethink the model in which we do it. And now I'll go back to where I started. As you reevaluate that, think about the technology, the people, and the process. So thank you very much. It's just been a wonderful pleasure being with you tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Dooley. Thank you, Dr. Shamsad. This has been wonderful. I am not an education expert, but I feel super enlightened, and I hope all of you do too. I want to just wrap up, and I'm sorry we're a little over our time. I hope you'll stick with me just for a couple minutes. First, I wanted to thank Dr. Shamsad, Dr. Dooley, fantastic presentations, and thanks to all of you. I haven't looked at the room, but at one point in time, I know we had about 200 people, and from all across Bangladesh. I saw many different universities represented, and also everyone is, all of us are important. I do see some really senior contacts here. Maybe I can mention them by name in case, and I apologize if I mispronounce. Golam Farouk, the Director General of the Directorate of Secondary and Higher Education from the Ministry of Education, the Vice-Chancellor Fazi Ilahi, from Ansanula University of Science and Technology, the Vice-Chancellor from, I think, Jahangiri University, I think, but I might have got that wrong, sorry, Jahangir Alam, Mazharul Islam, from Ahsanullah University Science and Technology, Professor and Director of IQAC, sorry. Shafaqul Alam, a registrar from Bangladesh Open University, and Nazeen Akhtar, Joint Director of Bangladesh Open University. As I said, really phenomenal participation. I loved all your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to them. What I would like to say to you, we mentioned at the beginning, this is the kickoff for a series of programs that we've envisioned based on feedback that we've heard from contacts like you. Let me run through some of those things that will be coming up. The next session we envision is with an instructional design expert from the University of Virginia, and that will be in mid-November. We have another program that we anticipate on student-centric teaching, and another one on assessment. If you have other ideas, we would like to continue this series, but we want to make it what would be most useful to higher education in Bangladesh. We just see our role as connecting you with your counterparts in the United States. What I can promise you from tonight is we are going to share this video. We will share this. We will collect all the links that were shared in the chat box. We'll share the chat box, and we will anyway, share that with everyone that was invited to this program. I'm trying to see if there's anything that I have forgotten to mention.
Arlissa?
Yes, please.
I was simply going to, I also sent you a number of relevant links. There was like a link to the impact program and things like, and I'm confident you'll share that as well.
I will. I did want to ask, is it okay if, are you comfortable, maybe we share your PowerPoint?
Absolutely.
People might want that. Okay, so we'll share the PowerPoint too. And I guess some feedback I would welcome from you all. You can send it to any of my colleagues, send it to Rehana, if you know Rehana, if you know Sohan, anyone on my team, or EMK. If they're, yes, and we will share it via email. Thank you for those that are asking, we'll share it via email. But if you would, if you think that we should do something different with the way that we've organized this session, for example, would you be okay extending it for 2 hours, or is an hour and a half about all you can manage in your busy schedule? Is there a different format? Anything that you would like us to try in a different way, we are open to it. Dr. Dooley and both Dr. Shamsad, I don't recall that they mentioned this specifically, but in addition to empathy and showing compassion, I do feel like, and giving people the benefit of the doubt, and being kind, the word that I think about is flexibility and adaptability as well. Those are the key things that together, I think it's what we have to be able to be to survive this current, survive and thrive, I would say. So thank you all so much. I'm sorry we went a little over. Really appreciate your participation, and I apologize we couldn't get to all of your questions, but look forward to hoping to see you in a month's time for the program on instructional design. Thank you so much. Take care and stay connected with us. Good night, everyone.